This day is given to us beyond anything we could create or earn. Whether deserved or undeserved, this day comes to us as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. So come and let us worship with gratitude for this and so many gifts, with humility for our shortcomings, resilience to face the challenges ahead, and let us worship with hope that we will continue to transform our lives and to transform our world. Welcome to the return of virtual-only worship here at the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. I am Reverend Eric Poza, interim minister, joined this morning by our music director Lee Hartman and Mike Patton in our sound booth. And it is true that we are gathering virtually again due to rising COVID numbers in the Baton Rouge metro area and the import of staying safe. We'll say more about that in a few moments, but we are glad that you have joined together with us from the many places where you are gathered. And we invite you to get to know a little bit more about our church and its activities, taking a look at our website for more information about our activities, virtual activities for the time being. But be it virtual or in person, we are, as always, glad you're with us. Welcome. Old Rock had been sitting in the same spot at the edge of a clearing in the middle of a pine forest for as long as anyone could remember, and even before that. Being a rock seems awfully boring, said Tall Pine. You sit in the same spot day after day, said Spotted Beetle. It's a very nice spot, said Old Rock. Don't you want to go anywhere? Asked Hummingbird. I've flown all over the world and sipped the nectar of exotic flowers. I would surely be bored if I could not fly. I flew once, said Old Rock. Gosh, said Tall Pine. How, said Spotted Beetle. Rocks don't fly, said Hummingbird. Old Rock told them about the time in the beginning when darkness was all around. And then I erupted out of a volcano and soared through a fiery sky into the bright light of a new world. So it was just the one time, said Hummingbird. And now you're sitting here, said Tall Pine. Being bored, said Spotted Beetle. I'm not bored, said Old Rock. Don't you want to see more, said Spotted Beetle. If I climb to the tip-top branch of Tall Pine, I might see a deer mouse nibbling seeds in a nearby tree, or watch ships sailing across the big lake. Old Rock said, I've seen a lot. Old Rock told them about the time a group of friendly dinosaurs lumbered by, munching every leaf in sight. Then, many years later, a not-so-friendly dinosaur came looking for a meal. And Old Rock hid a small dinosaur of another species that the big dinosaur was trying to eat. Time passed, things changed, and the world chilled, which wasn't too bad because Old Rock took a ride in a glacier and toured the land. Once the glacier melted, he said, it left me perched at the top of a ridge and I could see the place where the sky touches the earth. My, you have seen a lot, said Spotted Beetle. How unusual, said Hummingbird. Yes, but that was ages ago, said Tall Pine. Aren't you bored now? Don't you want to move? My limbs flutter gently in a breeze and dance wildly when the wind blows. I've never danced, but I'm pretty good at doing somersaults, said Old Rock. Old Rock revealed that after teetering on the ridge for a while, the ground rumbled, and I tumbled and stumbled down, down, down into a valley. Grasses grew, mastodons roamed, and lakes formed. I never knew a rock had moves like that, said Tall Pine. I wish I could have seen those things, said Spotted Beetle. And what happened next? Asked Hummingbird. Well, a pine forest sprouted up around me. One day, a strong breeze shook a pine cone loose. From the pine cone, a seed fell onto the forest floor. I watched that seedling grow to be the tall pine who dances in the wind and keeps me company. Sometimes a spotted beetle wanders along to report all that he sees, and every so often the loveliest hummingbird stops to rest after a long flight, and she describes the amazing places she's visited. It's a very nice spot, said Old Rock. Yes, it is, agreed Tall Pine. Very nice, said Spotted Beetle. Not boring at all, said Hummingbird. We share in many ways as we worship together, be it virtually or in person. Let us take a moment now for sharing of a more personal nature. If you would have shared a stone, as is the ritual in our congregation, I'll place one in a moment and invite you to share in the chat on YouTube if you're watching there, or wherever there is comments, by placing an asterisk for the stone or perhaps saying who it's for. But a couple to begin with. We place one for sympathy to Jan Dardan on the death of her father, Herschel Mears. And we place one of congratulations to Shirley Peak and Jim Vanderweel on the birth of their grandson, Theodorus. We also remember those with recent hospitalizations, Jeff Calms, Carol Landry. Remember Lynn Patton after her recent hospitalization and surgeries for the others. And while we don't normally recognize birthdays, a 90th birthday is worth recognizing. Happy birthday, Sarah Traylor. Now, we invite you to share as I place stones in your absence. We light the flame in our chalice, symbol of our freely covenanted Unitarian Universalist faith, saying together the words, "With hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love." Setbacks. Religious communities face setbacks, and I certainly find myself thinking about that fact this week. And the reason will be obvious to many of you. We have had to reclose our building for Sunday worship. But before I say more about that, and I will, let me unpack a story of another religious community that faced setbacks. Now, the details certainly differ, but I think there are some aspects of what they faced that illustrate well what this community, UCBR, faces now, even though there are centuries of difference between the two communities. This is a story from Jewish scripture. It comes out of the first few chapters of the book of Ezra. Not one of the more commonly cited of passages, but it tells the story of when the Persian king Cyrus issued the decree for the people of Israel to return to their land, from which they had previously been exiled in Babylon, and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Thousands of Jews responded. They gave up their lives in Babylon. They made the long and dangerous trek back to the land. The altar was rebuilt. They observed Sukkot, the festival of booths, began worship outdoors, and laid the foundation for the second temple. That's when the delays started. There were political enemies, the story tells, of the Israelites who tried to participate in the temple building process, presumably to slow it and disrupt it from the inside. And when that didn't work, they started actively discouraging the people, bribing officials to delay their plans. They even wrote a false accusation against the Jewish people to the new king of Persia. Well, the temple did finally get built, but the delays set them back 16 years. It's actually a fascinating tale, not told with any modern flair for the dramatic, but I could easily imagine some contemporary novelist, some screenwriter, perhaps, adapting it into a pretty compelling political thriller. Lots of intrigue, lots of backstabbing. Well, no one, to the best of my knowledge, is conspiring behind the backs of the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge with the goal of delaying our return to our building. And we're not dealing with issues with our foundation. No, for this church, it's the roof repairs that got delayed after storm damage in April. I'm pleased to report that work to replace our roof on our building of our church will begin a week from tomorrow. But like the ancient Jews, our return to our worship space has been delayed. We're experiencing a setback. And it may be easy to feel disheartened as we're going through this time. I can easily imagine that some of you feel upset or angry at this action. I'm certainly missing right now having people before me as I preach. There's a subtle interaction that happens between pulpit and pulpit and chairs, that feels different than I was just starting to get used to feeling again. But this is a time of change for us again. Not the same kind of change as happened 16 months ago, but it's one which throughout this worship service, we're going to explore what the setback means, how we might move forward. And we'll start with that right after this reading.
What I want to close with is talking a little bit about the sense of urgency that can come. There can be this desire to do everything at once or to fix everything. I think all that's going to do is land you all exhausted and feeling like you're going nowhere. Because even if your congregation is saying, we want all this to be fixed at once, they're going to be exhausted by it all changing quickly too. Does that make sense? So they may say, we really want to have worship right now. And then they get to worship and we want worship in the building with everybody together. And then they get there and they're overwhelmed by it because that's not what we've been doing for a year. And it's too much at once, right? So there's going to be a desire to rush and there's gonna be like, oh, no. And that's a normal thing. So kind of in trauma recovery work, we talk about having a window that has a shade. And the shade, you can slowly widen the window so you can let more light in. In other words, you open the capacity of a person to deal with the input that's coming at them. And so with your congregations and with you as leaders, think about how do you not just suddenly open up the blinds? I don't know about you, but first thing in the morning, if somebody suddenly opens up the blinds, I'm screaming, I'm hiding myself under a blanket, I don't want to come out, I don't have enough coffee, all of that starts to happen, right? You want to slowly open the window so that folks have time to adjust and get comfortable with each other again, to process all of these deep emotions that are coming up inside them, to slowly open the window where everybody can kind of have some capacity. And even after you do that, there will be some of your folks, and it may be you, who it takes a long time to really be able to enter back in a way that's helpful and meaningful.
I am certainly aware of the irony that we're wrapping up a 5-sermon series today on coming back together, and we're doing so on the day that we reclosed. Yes, this is a setback, as I said earlier, and it's one that I've heard a little bit of confusion about. So I'm going to ask the forbearance of those who are familiar with these details to unpack a little bit how we've gotten to the point we're at now, to tell what our current story is. Some of you know that after we closed the building in March of last year, a COVID safety team was formed that began to develop criteria for which we would stay closed and under which we might reopen in a gradual fashion. And they initially set as their determining factor a metric based on the number of cases of new infections in our parish, and then we clarified that to be the Baton Rouge metro area. And for quite a while, we were operating with the threshold that we would not reopen until we got below 10 cases per 100,000. And we actually started doing that in the very early fall or very end of summer last year and prepared the outdoor pods to return to outdoor worship as we had initially planned as one of the stages. And then by the time they were ready, the cases had gone up again, and we weren't able to even do that. After some long discernment, our board of trustees in May of this year went a different direction. they did decide to change the criteria. They set the number at 20 cases per 100,000 and determined that was sufficient for reopening for indoor worship. It took us a couple of weeks to get ready, but we did reopen in the second Sunday of June last month, and it was so good for me personally, finally to see face-to-face people that I'd been serving as minister for 10 months and in many cases had not yet met in person, or in quite a few other cases had not seen since I was here as your intern 19 years ago in person. And we tweaked those in-person services as we went. They started out very short, and we gradually expanded them, adding content. We also stopped checking people's temperatures as they were coming in the morning, realizing that was not effective. And we even began scheduling the memorial services, the first one of which did happen yesterday in person for Ed Allums. Even started scheduling some of our branches groups, our small group ministry gatherings in room 7 of this building. And then this week, the numbers of cases for COVID in this area skyrocketed. We passed that 20 cases per 100,000 threshold on Tuesday, and as of this morning, we were at almost 32 cases. The numbers doubled in 9 days. And it had such an impact that even the kids camp that has been renting our building this summer and having children here in the building for activities had to close down because of multiple cases of COVID among the children participating in the kids camp. So they will not be open this week. Because of that, the COVID safety team, when they met on Thursday, was unanimous. It was time to reclose. We essentially opened the blinds part way, but then it got too bright, and we had to shut them again, to borrow the analogy from Sunshine Wolf. And it's true that we are making exceptions for the memorial services. Now, I'll not speak for anyone else, not for Reverend Nathan, not for other staff, board, etc. But speaking for myself, I will say that there are only a few things that, with numbers this high, I would consider worth the risk of gathering, but avoiding the cruelty of once again taking away those opportunities to grieve for those we've lost, in most cases, months ago. In Ed's case, a year and a day before his memorial. That would be strong enough to make it worth taking the risk. So I'm glad we are making that exception. And yet, through all of this, our approach remains the same. We are keeping ourselves, we are keeping one another as safe as we can. And it's an approach that different people are having differing feelings about, but I see it as a very Unitarian Universalist approach. We're honoring the worth of every person and honoring their continued well-being. We're respecting our interdependence and recognizing that, sadly, in this pandemic, being together physically puts us at risk. And these are uncomfortable, but they are worth reflecting on. So when I return in a few minutes, I'll say a bit more about how we might face setbacks more generally.
Lift our gates towards distant view. Help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far, and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shining, illuminate our inward view. Help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new songs that become full symphony.
Let us join together in a deeper sharing, a time of prayer, reaching deep within ourselves, reaching far beyond ourselves to connect with what we know to be sacred. Let us pray. Spirit of life and of love, God known by so many names and mystery beyond all of our naming, we gather together on this day, not in the same space with one another, and feeling so many different ways in response to this change, to this reclosing. Some angry, some upset, some perhaps resigned, others determined to weather this transition. Help us to feel what we're feeling. Help us to be aware of ourselves and our deeper longings, as well as the ways in which we value one another, so that we may continue to go forward in the ways that best bring us together while also keeping us safe, so that we may journey on until we are back together physically once again. So may it be for us all. Amen.
So look for lots of opportunities to take this at a slow pace. Start with distance things outdoors. Keep doing some things online. Think about what works in your congregation so that you're able to have that connection, but folks are not getting overwhelmed by having everybody together at once or trying to get back to something that they may think they want but aren't quite emotionally, or particularly their brain is not quite ready to process yet. Because really it is between the ears. It's the processing part of our brains that we want this thing, but then it's too much. And so you want to pay attention to that gap. How are you slowly opening the window rather than just going back to the sunlight that used to be? Yeah, that's what I have.
I do appreciate Reverend Sunshine Wolf for sharing these reflections with us over these past few weeks. We are facing some unusual times and some emotionally complex times. And we have been in this sermon series reflecting on the complexities of coming back together, which I would say that even this reclosing is a part of. It may be a step back after some steps forward, but that is part of the process. Change is rarely linear, but often involves starts and stops, and it's true for us as well. But we have spoken about how this time is traumatic for many. And we recognize that even changes like this of reclosing can, for some, trigger some of the old feelings that you may have experienced over this past year plus during this pandemic. And there is always the danger of a degree of re-traumatizing. And that's not necessarily the case. Not every time we're triggered into feeling some old negative feelings does that mean we're re-traumatizing ourselves. But when there's a new event and also it's triggering, that can be the case. There is no easy way to focus on what it is we can do, but there are ways of finding forward. I'm appreciative of something I've encountered recently about how to cope with the possibility of re-traumatization. This is from a publication that was put out by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And it offers tips for managing and developing resilience in the face of re-traumatizing possibilities. And the first of those is to realize and appreciate the impact of the original trauma. For many of us, it may not feel like a traumatic experience these past 16 months. And it's possible that for a few it wasn't, but for many more, perhaps, than are realizing it. This has been the kind of intense event, not a one-time intensity, but an ongoing, pervading intensity that has had the emotional impact on many of us. So it's important not to underestimate what we've all been through, but also to recognize that there are tools available for us to recover, and that includes understanding how and why it happened, but also connecting with people who understand and can be helpful to you in the times that you're triggered. It is so easy for us to feel that we have to go through this alone. And it can be difficult to reach out in deeper ways. And I know people who have struggled with that in the past year. But when we can be not only clear about what's happening, and that does mean to some extent following the science and the research and some of the studies that have come out, while at the same time recognizing that we can easily overburden ourselves that way, we still do ourselves good when we can ensure that we have a support system that we can access pretty easily, and one that has people in it that we know care for us. And that can help us to develop the coping skills, to manage our stress. That can help us to come up with a plan for caring for ourselves, including those strategies for building resilience that we come back to so often: regular physical exercise, a regular spiritual practice, etc. And they do even mention practicing your spiritual beliefs or reaching out to a faith leader for support, which certainly Reverend Nathan and myself are continually open to. But it also means that sometimes we've got to seek some care from somebody who's trained, from a professional who can help us through the harder aspects of what we're experiencing. When we can start to reach forward in these ways, then we're equipping ourselves with some tools that can help the hard times that are beyond our control be more manageable. Not easy, but less difficult, at least difficult in fewer ways. And that can make it all the easier for us to keep going forward, even when we're frustrated, disheartened. And I'll conclude in a few minutes with talking about how we can cope specifically with setbacks. Well, we do once again come together in gratitude, even in our differing places, and we come together to express the values that are so dear to us, including the value of generosity, as we prepare to receive the morning's offering, which, again, we continue to receive not only for the good works of this congregation, but also as we are now sharing our offering every Sunday. In the Sundays of the month of July, we're sharing it specifically with Planned Parenthood of the Gulf Coast. So we invite you to see more about their good works and to give generously online in the ways that will be shown on screen shortly, as our offering is now gratefully received. So, how do we cope with setbacks specifically? As I was thinking about this, I was reminded of something I read a while back that was by a psychology professor in England, Stephen Joseph. And he's talked about 3 different options for coping. And he particularly expanded on this in a book he wrote on post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic growth. And its title, perhaps unsurprisingly, was What Doesn't Kill Us. But the 3 options for coping he talked about, the first is called avoidant coping. This is where we just intentionally turn our thoughts to something else, where we specifically shut out our feelings. It can be everything from losing ourselves in binging television or movies, to distracting ourselves with anything from seeing other people to going different places, physical activity, and even less healthy coping mechanisms like alcohol, drugs. Long term, of course, this is extremely problematic and not very helpful, often the opposite. But he points out, and I think he's right, that as a short-term protection until one's ready to face the trauma that they've experienced, sometimes avoidant coping is the best we can do. To borrow Sunshine Wolf's analogy again, when someone starts opening the blinds and it's too early, sometimes the best we can do is close them again and sleep another hour. So we don't need to beat ourselves up if we're doing some of this. It's just good to occasionally check in with ourselves and ask when the waiting until we're ready becomes a delay of our readiness. It's not always easy to determine, but it's worth exploring. But the second coping mechanism is emotion-focused coping. This is what it means for us to cope by managing our emotions, seeking sympathy from others, talking through our feelings. And this is an important aspect for, I would argue, all of us to some extent, because it can help us correct some misperceptions, including misperceptions about where we ourselves are at. It can help us gain perspectives and insights, and it helps us to avoid the danger that if we don't deal with our feelings, that can make it tougher to think clearly as well. The repressed feelings disrupt our thinking. But the third of the coping mechanisms is problem-focused coping, as he calls it. That is taking tangible steps to remove obstacles, to find solutions, to avoid being distracted by competing factors, and to get help when needed in achieving the goals that we're working towards. Now, Stephen Joseph finds that the people who are primarily doing this third option, the problem-focused coping, are the ones of the three who do the best in the face of trauma. They can see different angles to problems. They can change directions a little more easily. And I'm sure that's true. At the same time, I would argue that an approach that incorporates to varying degrees all three of these coping approaches might be the best for each of us. The measure of each will vary. The amount of time for each will vary. But sometimes it is appropriate for us to wait a little while until we're ready and then deal with the emotions and then solve what problems we can. Now, it may feel at moments like we're waiting as long as old rock waited, and may not feel like we have the patience of old rock in that lesson from earlier. But we don't need that degree of patience, but simply to realize that, like the Israelites in the book of Ezra, we might wait, but the time will come when the obstacles are gone, when the setbacks and the slow going are going to prove worth the wait. And I, along with you, look forward to that time. So may it be for us all. Amen.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us and everyone. We'll take one more step, one more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word, one more prayer. We will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
And so, as we go forth from this sacred time, from the many sacred places where we have gathered, let us go forth knowing ourselves to be graced with blessings, blessings of freedom, blessings of wholeness. For though this time of worship now ends, our service begins anew. Let us then go forth to serve this hurting world in the spirit of love. Thank you for joining us. Go in peace.